If you logged on a little bit early, we will be starting in less than 3 minutes. Just enjoy this countdown, and we'll be starting when the countdown gets to 0. Well, good morning, Living Faith Christian Fellowship. I'm glad that you are able to attend by YouTube. And so what I want to do this morning is just thank you for being a part of this. We did call a snow day today, and so we weren't sure how bad the roads were going to be. And just to be on the safe side, exercising an abundance of caution, we went ahead and canceled service. So we're not meeting in Erie this morning, but we are meeting on the World Wide Web. So one thing I'd like to encourage you before we get started today is this. If you want to grab a pen and paper or something to type notes into on a device, that would be great. You can do that because I've got some good points for what we're going to call fair fighting today. So especially married couples, you want to pay attention to that, right? Also, you may still check in on Facebook. And so you may want to wait till after the video is over to do that, so you don't have to move away from the video if you can't keep two screens open at the same time. But you'll probably have to type in the words Living Faith Christian Fellowship on your check-in until it auto-populates and you get it working that way. So we are excited that you guys are here. And before I get into the message today, I just want to make a few announcements here. You can, again, you can still check in on Facebook. And it would be good for you to invite other people as you're checking in to say, hey, tune in right now live or later after the message is over. It'll be up on YouTube and people can watch this. And we're going to make a few announcements now. March 16th, we're doing another Ultimate Impact Overview meeting. This one's going to be from 9 to 2. We have a room reserved at North Glen Christian Church on 106th and Irma. You'll need to see me to register for that. And this is a great way for you to learn how to get into an ongoing mentoring relationship that will encourage you and will equip you to be the best Christian you can be, while also being fruitful in the lives of other people, learning how to lead people to the Lord, and also learning how to train other people. So this is one of the most powerful ministries I believe that we have. And so I would love for everyone to be a part of that. Also on March 16th, ladies, that night, we're having a ladies' night cookie exchange and art project at Sarah Crewman's. It starts at 5 o'clock, and if you need any more details about that, you can contact Sarah Crewman for that. April 1st, we're having both another kids' night at 6 o'clock. That'll be at the Crookshanks, and at 6:30. So if you've got kids in both age groups, you can drop one off first and then the other one. 6:30, the teens will have a game night, food, and devotional, and that place is to be arranged. We don't have a place for that just yet. All right. So hopefully everyone's on now, and we are going to get right into our lesson. So since we're at home today, I thought it would be good for us to have something that's more family oriented. And what's more family oriented than family fights, right? Okay, so, but in any relationship, whether you're married, have kids, don't have kids, single, it doesn't matter. If you're in relationship with anyone, at some point in that relationship, there's going to be conflict. Now, since Jesus told us that loving one another is on his A priority list, it's up near the top of the most important commands, loving one another. What we need to do if we're going to be serious about discipleship is learn how to be serious in relationships. And since we know it's a matter of when, not if, we're going to have conflict, shouldn't conflict management be up near the top of our to-do list as far as having great relationships? So today we're going to talk a little bit about functional fighting, since we know it's, arguments are going to happen, conflicts, disagreements are going to happen, versus dysfunctional fighting. And so hopefully by now you have something to either type some notes in with or jot down on a pen and paper some things. I've got 9 ways that we can functionally fight so that our fights are productive, not counterproductive. Does that sound practical to you? I hope so. All right, so we know conflict is bound to happen in relationships. So loving one another means that we need to find ways to show love, especially when it comes to resolving conflict. Because unresolved conflict takes all the love out of the relationship, right? Okay, so number 1, here we go. Make sure the timing is right for the conflict to be resolved. Now, there's several different schools of thought on this, and we think, okay, well, some people think the best time to resolve a conflict is as soon as it happens. Absolutely every time. Now, many times this is true, but sometimes it's not true. Sometimes the emotions are so tender, the anger level is so high, that it's good to give a little bit of a cooling down period first. And if we could do that and then find, as soon as feasible, but maybe not right in the moment of the conflict, sometimes it's better to go ahead and wait just a little while. It could be a half an hour, it could be an hour, it could be a day or so. And sometimes you may even have to schedule, hey, I want to resolve this. This is not a good time for us to resolve it right now. I know that. We're not getting anywhere with this. So let's find a time when we're both a little cooler and let's really try to work towards resolution. So find out the best time to have the conflict, the best time to try to resolve the conflict, and don't be afraid to make an appointment. I know married couples, that doesn't sound very romantic, but I promise you it works. You'll be much more productive after everyone's cooled down and things are going better, and you can talk about it more rationally. Number 2, when you have a conflict and you believe that someone is in the wrong, even if you know they're in the wrong, go in asking, not accusing. Because when you accuse, all you do is raise defensive levels up, and it becomes a battle. Now everyone's not so much concerned about what's right as who's right, okay? And pride gets in the way, and I've got to win this battle at all costs. And sometimes you can win the battle but lose the war, and that's something that can happen. So go in asking. When you present something in a question format rather than accusing format, it actually lowers defenses. And the way God created our brains is that when a question is asked of us, we go in searching for an answer. And when we go searching for an answer, it actually diffuses a little bit of the emotion. And Jesus was the master at this. Jesus knew how to ask an appropriate question that would get down to a person's heart. Not just the issue, not just the manifestation of the issue, but really help a person look at their heart. So tone matters, how we say what we say, and asking in a question rather than an accusation is a great functional way to help get to resolution. The next one is one that Stephen Covey made famous many years ago in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and that is seek first to understand and then be understood. When you got two people in a relationship, you want to know who is the more servant-hearted one. It's the one that wants to listen before they speak. It's the one who wants to understand before they are understood. And sometimes when you're dealing with someone and maybe they're the one that's a little more volatile than you are, maybe they're the ones that their emotions are amped up a little bit more than yours, it is good to let them go ahead, even if you know they're wrong and the points they're making are wrong and it's irrelevant or whatever, let them get out whatever they need to say. And then give some affirming words that say, yeah, I understand how you could feel that way. And give it a moment to let that sink in. Don't go right into, well, I know you feel that way, but, okay, give it a little while. Let them be affirmed that you really heard them. Because a lot of times repetition happens in arguments and you say the same thing over and over and over again, back and forth. You can even, it's like you've rehearsed it or something. But when you break up that pattern, and you go in and you seek first to understand the other person, and you can kind of quote back to them how they're thinking about it, why they're feeling the way that they're feeling, and manage it that way, then they are less volatile, less emotional. Now you can say, well, let me share with you my perspective on that and kind of how I'm seeing that. When you do that, it makes all the difference in the world. Proverbs 18 verse 2 says, a fool finds no pleasure in understanding, but delights in airing his own opinions. So if you're the one that has to make everybody understand exactly how you feel, but then you don't reciprocate and let them speak how they feel, this verse is for you. Proverbs 18:2 is for you. A fool finds no pleasure in understanding, but delights in airing his own opinions. So that might be an indication to you that you need to change up your way of conflict resolution and be someone who seeks to understand before being understood. Number 4, find out the emotions behind the words and deal with them gently. And a lot of times we end up arguing about the argument, right? Sometimes it's like, well, you're not arguing fair, you're not fighting fair, and then we move off of what seems to be the issue and we move on to another issue, and now it's all about how you're fighting and how you're not being fair and you're being too emotional, or you're being unfair to my feelings, or you don't see the injustice in all this. And what happens is there are emotions behind the words. See if you can put a name to that. Is that frustration that you're hearing? Is that anger that you're hearing? Is something confusing? Is it confusion that you're hearing? And then respond to that emotion. You might even say something to the effect of, that seems like it really makes you angry, doesn't it? And they may go, well, duh, yeah, of course, what do you think? And so you're getting an idea of what the emotion is behind that. This happened with Nehemiah. When he was the cupbearer to the king, we read about in the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah was always there serving the king before every meal, taste testing his food, making sure it was okay, that kind of thing. And he was generally a happy person. But when he heard that the walls of Jerusalem had been broken down and burned and the city was in disrepair, and there was just shame and reproach brought upon the city of God, it broke his heart so much he couldn't even hide his emotions in front of the king. Now, a lot of people believe that in the day and time Nehemiah served, in that culture, in that time, it was actually a crime to appear unhappy or sad before the king. And yet, because Nehemiah had built up this relationship with the king over years, and he had known him, there was a bond there. So when Nehemiah came in one day and he was so upset he couldn't hide his emotions, the king said to him, "What is this?" He said, "Why does your face look so sad when you're not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." Nehemiah 2:2. The king recognized the emotion behind the words, or maybe there weren't even words there in Nehemiah's case. He was just trying to serve and do his job, but he was overwhelmed with emotion. And when we have conflict, and his was not necessarily conflict between him and the king, but sometimes when we have conflict, the words can be spoken too much, too little, or not at all. But if we're the person trying to bring resolution to the conflict, let's deal with the emotions and then not get too mixed up on the words like always and never. Will you always do this? Will you never do this? Sometimes always and never are thrown out in general senses and they don't mean exactly always and never, right? Okay, so find out those emotions behind the words and deal with them gently. Number 5, see the health of the relationship as the biggest issue and all the other issues as just the manifestation of a deeper problem. Have you ever been in a conflict, and especially, like married couples or best friends that have been close for a long, long time, and things have kind of been building up under the surface for a while, and then this small, tiny little thing will happen, and someone just explodes on it. On a scale of 1 to 10, maybe it's just a 1 or a 2, but all this pent-up emotion that's been pushed down for so long comes out on this thing that's not even really the issue, but they're making it the issue. We need to be able to recognize those kinds of things and see the relationship as the most important part of all this. And again, as I mentioned before, sometimes you can win the battle but lose the war. And what that means, especially in a marriage situation, is you can be the one that proves you're right, but if you prove you're right in a way that just hurts the other person deeply, you may have won the argument, but now you've done more damage to the relationship. So we all have to learn, what I taught our kids was this phrase, emotional self-control. And really that's what self-control is. It happens at an emotional level. And especially when there's conflict, and especially when things have been building up and building up and building up over time, we have to exercise a tremendous amount of emotional self-control. And the way we do that is we change our perspective. Our perspective has to be, do I see the relationship as paramount? There have been times in mine and Noel's relationship where, we don't fight all the time, but at times we have conflict like every other married couple, and things will just be so misunderstood or something like that. We'll have to stop and say, I love you and I'm committed to you. And I need you to know that right now. But right now, we got a real problem we're trying to work through, but I just need to stop and give you some assurance. I love you and I'm committed to you, even while we're working out this problem. And sometimes that word of affirmation, just that assurance that the relationship is still most important. Yes, we've got a problem. We're not sweeping it under the rug. We're not ignoring it. We're dealing with it. And it may take a while to figure it out. But through that process, I still love you. And I'm still committed to you. Or this friendship is still valuable to me. And I don't want this to mess that up. So let's try to work through this so we can get back to where the love is flowing the way it needs to. So the health of the relationship is the biggest issue. And all the other issues are just the manifestation of that deeper problem. All right, number 6, press to resolution, not victory. All right, so is there a win-win solution here? If there is, then collaborate on the answer. Collaborate on it. Sometimes there is a win-win. There's something where everybody can get a little bit of a win out of it. Now, it's not always that way. Sometimes there has to be, I give, you give, but maybe one person's giving a little more than the other person. Or maybe there's a definite right and wrong here. Somebody just needs to admit it, humble themselves and say, I was wrong in what I was doing or in that thing that I did. So we've got to press to resolution, not victory. Because if there's a winner in the argument, then there could be a loser in the marriage or in the relationship. So we have to remember that. Number 7, be humble and forgive. This cannot be overstated. It is absolutely important. Be humble, be appropriate, and give specific apologies for specific things that were done. And complete, genuine forgiveness needs to be spoken in a loving tone. And again, tone matters, voice inflection matters, volume matters. If everything is at a 10 on volume and a 10 on intensity and a 10 on everything, just to try to, that does not connote humility. It doesn't connote a forgiving, a willingness to forgive. So what we need to do is we need to understand how to be humble and how to forgive. All right, number 8, give unconditional love. This is connected to the one, and that's why I put these two together. Always end with an affirmation of your unconditional love for each other, even when the emotions of that are not there. Because we got to remember, biblical love, agape love, is always a decision and a commitment more than a feeling. Feelings always follow behavior. Feelings follow words. And so for us, for the feelings to come back, we have to affirm the commitment to the relationship. So even when you don't feel it for the other person or from the other person, love is a commitment, not a feeling. And a lot of times, something that seems really, really important in the moment, after you affirm each other, even if you don't work through it and get to a final resolution on the first time, that ending of affirmation, or maybe even in the middle, like we talked about in point 7, I love you and I'm committed to you, or I want this friendship to work, I don't want this to get in the way, are the words that the person needs to hear to calm their spirit down just a little bit. Number 9, respect your spouse's boundaries. Okay? Romans 12:10 says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Now that's hard to do, isn't it? It's hard to do on a good day, but when you're in an emotional argument or some kind of conflict that has built up over time, it is hard to honor the other person above yourselves. Gary Smalley gives this great example in one of his teachings where he brings up on stage a Stradivarius violin. Now if you know anything about violins, you know that Stradivarius is the very top model out there. It's the brand name that all the professionals want, and there are fewer and fewer around now. Okay, it's actually become a collector's item. But these things are very expensive. They're considered the best violins in the world, and when people actually get to hold one, it's almost like it takes your breath away. It's like, oh, wow. And you'll be very careful not to drop it, and when you pick it up and you put it and you bring the bow up, everything is considered so that you're protecting this vital instrument and loving it with everything that you have to make sure you don't do any damage to it, because you want it to last a long time. Same is true in our relationships. We need to look at each other, and sometimes I've been married 25 years, but I still need to look at my wife and go, oh, wow, I can't believe how blessed I am. I am married to the most beautiful, wonderful woman in the world. I'm going to look around the camera and tell her that now. Okay, she's behind the camera. You can hear her laughing because she doesn't hear that enough. All right, so respect one another's boundaries. Don't just find your spouse as someone to dump your garbage into their yard, right? We don't want to do that. All right, so those are things we want to do. What about dysfunctional fighting skills? I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. And so if after this lesson you want the notes from this, I have them all laid out. I can email them to you. Just send me an email or a text with your email address if I don't have it, and I'll be happy to send these to you, because I am going to need to go through these quickly for the amount of time that we have. So probably, top 15 or so dysfunctional fighting skills. So you might be dysfunctional in your relationship if these describe you. All right, the first one is interrupting. And that is not letting the other person finish their thought. Now, a lot of people who have more, assertive personalities, type A's, maybe even the highly influential people, they in their mind, from the first few words you get out of your sentence, they know, or they think they know exactly what you're going to say, and they interrupt you in the middle of the sentence so that they can go ahead and respond, because they're quick thinkers. They're boom, 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 just like that, right? If you're one of those people, let me say, even though you know what they're going to say, it makes a person feel shut down when you interrupt them mid-sentence. And it actually detracts from the resolution of the argument. So let them say, even if you know, let them say everything they need to say. And I know a lot of times some of these personalities are not known for their patience, but this is an exercise for you in emotional self-control. Let the person finish their thought. Maybe even call it back to them, what you hear them saying. And then you respond. Now, could you respond quicker and faster? Of course you could. You're a quick thinker. That's your personality. That's your brain power. That's a talent you have. But even great talented people must use self-control. So interrupting. Proverbs 18:13 says, do not answer before listening. Now, it can't be more misunderstood, can't be more easy to understand than that. Listen to everything a person has to say before answering. The next one is blaming. And so in Job chapter 4 verse 8, he says, as I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. So if you're plowing evil and you're sowing trouble, that's exactly what you will reap. If you're one that always has to blame, always has to accuse, always has to make sure the fault is put squarely on the other person, and just heaping guilt on them, that doesn't do. Now, of course, you have to say this is the problem, all right? But there's a difference between describing what the problem is and pointing the finger and blaming and accusing, right? Okay, the next one is justifying. This is when someone's coming to us and they are saying, here's where I see the problem, and the problem is you. And we can say, well, here's the reason I do that, and here's why it's okay. When really we know it's not. All right, 1 John 1:9 says, if we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. Someone else's wrong does not make you right. Just because someone else did something wrong does not give you the right to do something else wrong. And it's real easy to say, well, they always do this, so I'm justified in that. No, you're not. Wrong is wrong, even if everybody's doing it. And right is right, even if nobody's doing it. So don't let another person's behavior affect your character. You respond out of who you are as a Christian. I'm a person committed to holiness. I'm a person committed to love. I'm a person committed to unity. And that's where I come from when I'm arguing. That needs to be our mindset. The next one is similar to justifying. It's rationalizing. And in Matthew chapter 7, verses 22 through 23, Jesus prophesied that what's going to happen on Judgment Day, the day sometimes we call the last day, says, many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. These people had rationalized that since they did great works for God, since they did even sensational, miraculous works for God, they were automatically getting in. Then God never said you're getting into heaven based on how many miracles you did, or how many demons you cast out, or how many good deeds you did, or what a good person you were. None of that is the standard for judgment on Judgment Day. Here he talks about, I never knew you. There was not the relationship there. When we come to God, it's more than these few steps, and now I'm in, and then I've got to do these things afterwards, and I go to church, and I tithe, and I participate, and I'm involved, and that kind of thing. Those are great things. Those are wonderful things. Many of them are so important to the kingdom of God. But that's not the standard for judgment. There's got to be a relationship with God. There's got to be love between you and God. Now, His love is unconditional. It's always coming down to us, okay? But are we reciprocating? All right. Here's another one that's real easy to do, especially when you're comfortable with someone, okay? And that is sarcasm. Ooh, hit a nerve there, didn't I? The Proverbs has something to say about this too. In Proverbs 22, verse 10, it says, drive out the mocker, and out goes strife. Quarrels and insults are ended. Wow, let me read that again. Drive out the mocker, and out goes strife. Quarrels and insults are ended. Sarcasm is basically mocking. That's the biblical word for sarcasm, okay? Put downs, jokes, mocking are immature and only add fuel to the argument's fire. Next is threatening, okay? In Ephesians 6:9, Paul told the Ephesians, and masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So we have all these ideas in our mind about who's more important, who's more valuable, that kind of thing. And if we feel like it's us, pride has gotten in touch with us, and we feel like we can threaten or belittle someone else or tell them what we're going to do to them in some kind of negative way. That is wrong. We're on a level playing field at the foot of the cross. No one is more important than someone else, and someone is not more valuable than someone else, even if they're in a position of authority, even if they hold great authority. It doesn't matter. We're all human beings. We all have one soul. We all have to manage that soul well, and God is Lord of all of us. Here's another one, avenging. Avenging. All right, Romans chapter 12, verses 17 through 21 says this, do not repay anyone evil for evil, but be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, sometimes it doesn't, but as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to eat. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. If all we do is play tit for tat and we're just always trying to get the other person back because we don't feel like the score's been evened out, and boy, I owe them a little more heaping on, I owe them a little more punishment, that kind of thing. So I'm going to take revenge. I'm going to avenge my hurt feelings. I'm going to avenge, whatever. We're not having the attitude of Christ. Only God has the right to avenge. And so we have to be careful not to be vigilantes relationally. It's a very important thing. Next is overgeneralizing. I mentioned the use of words always and never earlier, and it's kind of typical that you can do that, because in our emotions we feel like, well, you never take out the garbage, or you always raise your voice when this happens, okay? And early on in the marriage, when my wife would use the term, never, I would be like, well, yeah, there was that one time I did that. And so always doesn't always mean always, and never never means never, or rarely means never, okay? So we need to think about this in a sense of not overgeneralizing. So if you're one that tends to throw out the word always or never, think about how that's coming across to the other person. Try to avoid using that if it's not accurate. And if you're the person who hears the words always or never, just realize that's an overgeneralization. Don't make that the point. Otherwise, we're going to end right back up like we talked about a few minutes ago, arguing about the argument instead of settling the issue, right? Here's another one, getting historical. A comedian once said, every time my wife gets angry at me, she gets historical. The guy said, what do you mean? She gets hysterical? He's like, no, she gets historical. She remembers every bad thing I've ever done my whole life and throws it back up at me, okay? So we have to be careful in marriage relationships, husbands and wives. I'm not just picking on the wives here. 1 Corinthians 13:5 says, love keeps no record of wrongs. Now that's a hard one. That's a really hard one, because when you're in a relationship with someone for years, over time there has been this hurt, this upset, this mistake, this sin, this conflict that seems to resurface over and over and over again. We have to be careful to only use this tool in our tool belt to establish that there is a pattern, not as a hammer to hit the other person over the head with. If you want to mention that this has been a pattern in the past and you're just seeing it again, that's okay. If you're just throwing back up in the person's face everything they've ever done that's anywhere close along the lines of what you're being hurt by now, that's not okay. All right, the next one is undermining, okay? Back in the days of while the wall was being rebuilt, Ezra's time, there's this passage, this passage in Esther, chapter 3, verses 8 through 9. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, there is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them. Now this was a total undermining. Notice how general and vague the language is. There is a certain people, not soon to be Queen Esther's people, whom you've fallen in love with and you're about to make queen. There's a certain group of people, and they're doing these bad things. And I want you to go ahead and pronounce judgment on them without knowing all the details. And I want you to think of this person in a certain way, or this group of people in a certain way. And there's undermining either a person or a group of people. And we see it throughout Scripture. In the lesson I'm probably going to do next week, we'll look at how Absalom actually undermined the entire kingdom of David and did a coup. He did a temporarily successful coup attempt in David's kingdom. And so we'll look at that either next week or the following week. All right, so we don't want to set someone else up for a fall. That does not help the relationship. Just a few more here. Screaming. Proverbs 15:1 says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And we talked about tone, right? It's hard when things are very emotional. It's very difficult to keep the tone at a level, to keep the emotions at a level where we can actually have productivity in the relationship. All right? So screaming is usually not a good option. And by the way, it's not that your spouse doesn't hear you at your previous level of decibels, so saying it louder or more often is not the problem. It's not that they don't hear you. It's not that you haven't said it enough. So I usually say it like this: volume and repetition do not solve arguments. State it, then move on to the solution of it. So if all we do is focus on the problem, we never get to the solution, do we? And that means the conflict is never resolved. So there's another communication problem going on in addition to whatever the issue is if screaming is persistent. All right, next is the opposite of that one, and that's the silent treatment or withholding words or affection. If you're shutting down emotionally and shutting the other out, that immediately stops any kind of progress. There are times when a cooling down period is needed. I mean, you're obviously not going to have a long romantic hug in the middle of a very intense, argument, but we don't want to totally give the silent treatment. We don't want to withhold words or affection from people. If you need a cooling down period, that's fine, but only for as long as it takes to cool down. It shouldn't be for days on end. Should never last that long. Cooling down should also not be used as an escape from the argument. Well, if your response is always, well, I'm just too upset to talk about this right now. At least come up with, give me 5 minutes, or give me an hour, or I've got to leave in 10 minutes and this is going to be a 20-minute discussion. I want to be able to finish it and complete it. So can we take care of this, later tonight when I get back from my appointment? Again, setting a time is not a bad thing if you know how long it's going to take you to cool down. But don't use cooling down as a deflection from even dealing with things. Okay, that's not appropriate either. We've got to find a way and an appropriate time for handling these things. Next one is complaining. Philippians 2:14 says, do everything without complaining or arguing. All right, and in our words, sometimes we use the word nagging, right? So there's no whining allowed. We're not going to whine about things. We'll state the problem and move as quickly as we can into the solution. All right, and the final one is this, superiority. Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before the fall. Wow. Pride is one of the easiest things to get in the way. If I feel I'm right, or I know I'm right, or I've got to prove I'm right, again, this is going to lead to some kind of downfall. Remember, spouses, friends, you're not a parent talking to a child, you're a spouse talking to a spouse, or you're a friend talking to a friend. So don't come across as the one that's always in charge and always has to talk down to the other one. That's an air of superiority. Jesus never showed that, even though he was the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He never took an air of superiority. And as his followers, we need to do the same. All right, so I hope this has been practical for you. I've been pretty quickly moving through some of these points. Again, if you want to get an email with all these points in written version, I'll be happy to email you this document. I think it'll be great for your friendships. It'll be great for your marriages. You can use it within your families. All kinds of practical applications for this. But let's keep that emotional self-control that we need to have in our relationships as we use those relationships to really honor God with. I'm going to close in a prayer, and then I'll leave it with you guys. God, thank you so much for the example of Jesus, for the principles we've learned in the various passages we looked at today. And I pray that you give each of us a strength inside of our spirit, a willingness to want to resolve, a willingness to want the best in every relationship, to never give up on any relationship, but to say, I will stay engaged, especially to the ones I'm in a covenant with, like a marriage. And so, God, we pray that you give us the inner strength in our inner being to be the people you want us to be, to give us that emotional self-control, to live out healthy, great relationships that are to your glory and honor. In Jesus we pray. Amen. God bless you.